Peace and riches blessings. I am Michael B. Beckwith, the host of Take Back Your Mind. Dynamic blessings. You know what today is? Today is the day of the rest of your life. It's a good day, your life. But you know what today is? Today is Take Back Your Mind, Life Question of the Week, in which I get to virtually go into the grab bag of questions and take a question and answer it. And hopefully it fits not just the person who's asking the question, but the thousands of people who are tuning in on a regular basis can get something from the question. Thank you for tuning in to Open Your Heart, Take Back Your Mind, Life Question of the Week. This question comes from Savannah. And we don't hold this against Savannah. She's from Michigan. That's beautiful. She emerged from Michigan, but she's actually a world citizen. She's actually a cosmic citizen. I digress. Let's get into her question. I'm very new to my spiritual journey, but I often feel confused and want to give up. I watch YouTube videos, I read books, but I still feel lost and don't have the tools to keep me motivated to try and learn more. One of my biggest issues is trying to find my spiritual self, she has that in quotes, while engaging in the worldly, in quotes, roles, such as big sister, best friend, etc. Especially because no one around me sees life through these spiritual lens. And I've been told by my family members to stop acting weird. So I turn myself off and go back on autopilot so I won't be an outcast. However, I know my purpose is so much bigger than how I'm living now. How do I balance all of these? This is so good. First of all, when we think of, I'll work backwards. First of all, when we think balance, we often think about the Libra scales or the Egyptian scales where we're seeking to balance like this. No. Spiritually speaking, balance is like when you learned how to walk. You know, you crawled and then you get up on your feet and you kind of fall forward and fall, and then finally you learn to balance. You were balancing going forward, one step in front of the other. So when we think of spiritual balance, we don't think about this, we think about this. We think about walking forward. So when you ask, how do I balance this? You're really asking, how do I grow? How do I walk forward? How do I become more myself? Now, you have what you call spiritual self and worldly roles, big sister, best friend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, your real nature is spiritual, and it's to shine through the different roles that you have. Best friend, mother, sister, we all have different roles. But that's not our nature. Those are just particular roles that we put on throughout the course of the day. You might be an employee as part of your day, then you might be a brother or a sister, or you might be a husband or a wife. These are all different roles. But there is something about you that's permanent and transcends those roles. So what you want to do is ask yourself, there's a meditation that we practice where you close your eyes and you say, who am I? It's called existential meditation. Who am I and what am I? And you listen. And what starts to bubble up, it starts to tear away your identification with the roles. I'm an employer, I'm an employee, I have this job, I do this, I do that, I do this. It tears away your human doings until you have a greater awareness of your human being. Now, the human being moves through the roles, but is not solely identified with those roles. So you go from being a role mate to a soul mate. You're in tune with your own soul. Now, the other thing that's hidden in this question is that people thinking you're weird and you got to get real. When you're on your path, there comes moments where you don't fit in the old patterns and the old paradigm, because those were role mates. You were the big sister, you were the daughter, and you had a way of, based on survival, how to navigate through those relationships so you didn't stand out, so you fit into the dynamic of the family or friendships. But when you start to grow spiritually, you start to break out of that. It doesn't mean you cut people out of your heart. It just means that you do not diminish your light to fit into a limited paradigm. And sometimes those relationships change. Sometimes relationships that weren't that important to you before suddenly become very important because you guys are meeting from the center, and relationships that were very important to you suddenly become, oh, that's not really a soul friendship, that's an acquaintanceship, because we didn't really have a connection with our spiritual nature. We had a connection because we rooted for the same team, we went to the same high school, we were born in the same state, we shared certain political opinions. But when you start to go into the deeper nature, you start to connect with people that previously you may not have been close to, but suddenly you're very close to them because you realize you're emanating from the source of all creation. There's a spiritual connection that's bigger than any other human connection. In other words, there's the family you were born to, and then there's your spiritual family that emerges. Sometimes they're the same. I'm privileged that in my case, my mother, my brothers, and different people around me, that family, we have a certain spiritual connection. And even though we're quite different and approach things differently, we bond in this infinite consciousness of the all good. And I know of people who were born into certain families, but they don't necessarily vibrate with their brother or sister. They may meet on Christmas and Thanksgiving and Hanukkah and all that, but the rest of the year they don't really connect because they have different spiritual families in which they're more connected to. That's a part of growth, development, unfoldment. You love everybody, you forgive everybody, but you may not be connected spiritually to everybody. And that may happen later, I think about certain people in my life that when I grew spiritually, the pattern and the habits that we had together just didn't fit anymore. But 20 years later, they showed up at Agape and we're all interested in what I had to say. Took 20 years for that seed thought to incubate. So you've had some number of things here. I feel confused and want to give up. I feel lost and don't have the tools to keep me motivated to try to learn more. Trying to find my spiritual self. How do we get there? We have to have some level of practice. Intention and practice leads us to awakening. So you're very new to your spiritual journey, which means, there's a lot of confusion there. Confusion is an extremely high state of consciousness because two or more things are being held in your awareness. There's the old thoughts, beliefs, opinions, points of view, and then there's the new, occupying the same space. And so it appears confusing. But ultimately, as you begin to pay attention more and more to your spiritual path, it begins to dominate. And the old identification of who you thought you were begins to disintegrate. And then confusion gives way to clarity. So if you're confused, that's a high state. Two things are occupying. Now here's the deal. In the Newtonian model of physics, it states that two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. It's impossible. But in quantum reality, two things can occupy the same space. More than two things can occupy the same space in the same time because they're vibrating at different frequencies. You see? So that in your awareness, you can have the frequency of who you used to be, and then you have the frequency of what you're becoming. What you're becoming is vibrating higher. And after a while, it begins to dominate. And then what happens? Transformation. You become new. And that process lasts forever. You're constantly becoming new based on where your attention is. So, Savannah, great question. You're new to the spiritual journey. Confusion is a high state of consciousness. So many things are being occupied in your awareness. You're reading all these books. You feel a little lost. You're trying to find your spiritual self. You're going in and you're asking, who am I and what am I? Insight will occur. Don't shrink yourself to be with other people. You don't have to bombast everything. You don't have to share all of your spiritual views to your family. You can keep that to yourself until your spiritual family emerges where you can have those kind of conversations without judgment. They're not calling you an outcast. So that you can be at home on Christmas, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, New Year's, Kwanzaa, whatever it is you celebrate. But you're not trying to be an outcast. You just know how to handle being with your biological family. Then what will happen is this. As you have some degree of practice and you start to grow, people will notice that you've changed. You don't have to shout it from the rooftop. You don't have to say, I'm spiritual now. They just notice that certain things don't bother you. You have a level of peace. You have a certain tendency to put certain things more important in your life than other things. Your priorities change. Yeah, you're on the right path. And you are correct. You says, however, I know my purpose is so much bigger than how I'm living now. Yes, you are here to live a purposeful, intentional life. Go in and ask, what is the next step in my spiritual evolution? And then listen with your whole being when you go to sleep at night and when you wake up in the morning, and you will be drawn to the next steps, and you will draw to you the next steps. Thanks for the question, Savannah. Have a beautiful day. Hey, thank you for joining me today. If you'd like to ask a question, please email me at podcast@michaelbeckwith.com. And you know what? Your question just might be featured. Have a beautiful and bright day.